A lost city lies hidden in the emerald jungle of Honduras. The enigmatic carvings of its ancient Maya builders guarded their secrets for 1,000 years. We thought they whispered of gentle stargazers. But now the code lies broken, and the hieroglyphs shout tales of bloody wars and human sacrifice. Who were these people, and what disaster drove them from their mighty city?
I'm Rhys-Davies. Join me as we unravel the mystery of Copan, next on Archaeology.
In 1839, lured by rumors of a fantastic lost city, American explorer and diplomat John Lloyd Stevens hacked his way into the thick mountain jungles of Honduras. The rumors hinted of a great Maya city, full of great monuments and strange carvings, built and then abandoned long before the white man set foot on New World soil. But even the tall tales he had heard could not prepare Stevens for the ghostly presence that loomed up before him.
It lay before us like a shattered bark in the midst of the oceans. Her masts were gone, her crew perished. All was mystery, dark, impenetrable mystery.
What sophisticated race had built the elegant city which lay before him, still nearly intact? Where had they gone? Most perplexing of all were the strange, chaotic carvings that adorned the temples. Were they some sort of language? But here, as at other Maya ruins, their mystery remained impenetrable. The carvings defied translation, just as the pyramids resisted explanation. Stymied scholars resorted to imagination, sketching a picture of the Maya as a peaceful, contemplative people, thriving under the watchful eye of wise astronomer priests.
The scholars were wrong, dead wrong. Today's archaeologists working in the jungles of Central America have come to know a quite different Maya. They've cracked their code, and the ancient peoples have found their voice again. In the once mighty city of Copan, hieroglyphs speak of war, blood ritual, and human sacrifice. Who then were these people? And what apocalypse brought their great dynasty to its knees?
When I walked among its temples, I did not see a pile of stone, but I thought, Washaklahun Ubak Awil built this. He dedicated that ball court. And I began to understand all of those works, not as the relics of a dead civilization, but as the fossils of the human beings, the minds of the people who had created them. Copan came alive.
When Linda Sheely first walked into the jungles of Central America back in the late 1960s, Maya scholarship was in its infancy. The Maya had tamed the rainforests, growing corn, cacao beans, and coffee, much as their descendants do today. They built great cities at Tikal, Yaxchilan, Chichen Itza, and Palenque. They traded in precious stones such as jade, fashioned some of the finest sculpture in the New World, and built pyramids to rival those of the Egyptian pharaohs. Beyond that, there was still much to learn. Scholars had resorted to a wishful thinking that spoke more eloquently of their own times than those of the Maya.
From the period of the 1930s up through the 60s, the great scholars of the time, Morley, Thompson, and others, characterized Maya society as having basically two groups of people, a whole bunch of peasant farmers who supported a very tiny elite who spent their lives contemplating the stars and time and living in ceremonial centers that were filled once or twice a year during great ritual festivals. The picture that was drawn of the Maya is that they never had war, they never disagreed with each other, And one wonders how they got close enough to each other even to reproduce themselves through the common human means.
People clung to that idea tenaciously, and I think part of the reason for that is they were reacting to all of the excesses and the maladies of Western culture. You have to remember that their context was that of 2 world wars, where literally the whole world was involved in a deadly conflict.
They wanted a peaceful people. They wanted to know that someplace in the world there was a human community that lived without war and competition.
For 15 years, archaeologist Bill Fash and his colleagues have continued and expanded excavation techniques that allow them to reconstruct the monuments even as they dissect them. In the past, archaeologists at Maya sites had no choice but to dismantle the grand monuments, layer by layer, to get at older structures obscured by the more recent ones. But at Copan, the archaeologists have created a delicate labyrinth of tunnels through the ruins, leaving them virtually intact.
Since the building of the Acropolis was a matter of layers upon layers upon layers, or as some have commented, it's like boxes inside of boxes, the easiest way to get from one to the next is by the tunneling. The world of the tunnels is like 3-dimensional. And it's very different because you can go up, down, or sideways. You can move in every direction.
If we had to do a traditional archaeological excavation of the Copan Acropolis, we'd have to destroy half of everything we dug. But with tunneling, we're able to just do surgical strikes. It's as if we're doing arthroscopic surgery, and we can just go in there with just very small excavations to exactly the point we want and get a maximum of information for a minimum of disturbance to the archaeological site. The tunneling's been vital to understanding the history of ancient Copan. We have the hieroglyphs that tell us about the kings, but the tunneling tells us about the buildings that were constructed by each of these rulers.
We were one day away from giving up here. We had found the cut, and I took one look at it with my flashlight, and I could see femur fragments and some of the shell and the 2 stones, and it just clicked immediately that it was not only this huge chamber, but that it had to be something very important.
Through the tunneling, we've discovered a part of the offering that is actually placed above the tomb. This was a big surprise. We didn't think we were going to find any human figures here. It's the largest tomb we've ever found in Copan.
Clearly, these were the tombs of noblemen, perhaps kings. But their identities remain a mystery. If there are clues to the dead man's identity, they likely reside in the walls of Copan's monuments, in the hieroglyphs that for so long remained obstinately silent. But only in the last few years has the language come alive. For the first time in a millennium, classic Maya can be heard among the jungle ruins. And what is being spoken has radically altered our view of the people who wrote on these walls.
We went from talking about empty ceremonial centers which held only priests, basically, and people living in little hamlets on the outside who would come in on Sunday to peddle their corn, to some large urban centers, to understanding the fact that these cities, like Copan, was over 20,000 people living with the same kind of pollution that we get today in our cities. We now understand that the Maya were really much more like everybody else's. They're much more human.
They were much more human than we had imagined them. With the breaking of the Maya code, the picture of these people as peaceful stargazers crumbled. The great kings of Copan led their people in bloody battles against their neighbors.
We know that the Maya were like any other, quote, civilized group of people. They had a lot of war. They had a lot of conflicts with their neighbors. They were always jockeying for position to see who could be the biggest and the most powerful ruler of his time. To be a great and virile king, you had to go out and impose your will on somebody else by the use of force. You can see this in the depictions here on this figure. There are upside-down human heads, shrunken heads actually, that are trophy heads, that are the bounty of war. You can even see the ropes that they use to tie these heads together.
The hieroglyphs tell again and again of human sacrifice and self-mutilation. But to the Maya, they ensured continuation of their cosmos.
The most sacred substance was human blood, especially a king's blood. Led in auto-sacrificial ritual was the greatest gift that a king could offer to the gods and to his ancestors. There are a number of sites where child sacrifices have been found. It was thought that the baby's tears would bring the rainwater from the sky. So a lot of sacrifice was oriented toward fertility, toward ensuring that the natural cycles took their course and that the harvest would be bounteous and the people would be happy.
There are two great acts that kings consistently presented in the public forum. One is the taking of captives. The other is the taking and the offering of the king's own blood in ritual sacrifice taken from the most sacred areas of his own body. For a male, the genitals. For the female and the male, it's the tongue. It's the place where human beings reproduce themselves and the place where speech is made, where meaning is communicated from one person to another. Bloodletting was the central act of piety. Now why? One kind of soul is called chulel. It is a sacred living substance that is in our bodies that is never destroyed. It's passed on from you to future generations. That kind of soul resides in human blood. So that when kings give victims of war in sacrifice, or when they take blood from themselves, they are all giving the most potent and the most important, valuable substance on the face of the earth. Our culture says the same thing. What do we say? Greater love hath no man than he give his life for his brother.
Bloodletting marked each celebration in the calendar and each rite of passage in the life of the Maya. The birth of a child, the consecration of a temple, the preparation for battle, and the thanksgiving for victory. Even Maya sport was fraught with cosmic importance. Copan's magnificent ball court, one of the best preserved in the Maya world, witnessed intricate morality plays in the guise of athletic competition.
The ball was seen to represent the passage of the sun in the sky. And much of the ball game was oriented toward ensuring the safe and timely passage not only of the sun through the sky, but of the moon and the planets and so forth.
The ball game is the fundamental metaphor of what life was. In this myth, two hero twins go to the other world. There, they confront the lords of death, disease, starvation, warfare. All of the confrontation is played out in the ball court.
The king dressed up to play ball, embodying the forces of good, and he faced players who were dressed up to embody the forces of evil. So that when the king would defeat those people, he was in fact defeating all the things that could hurt his people.
In this competition of life over death, the losers sometimes paid the ultimate price.
Oftentimes there are very clear depictions of the sacrifice of ball players. In fact, sometimes they even bind the losers up as a ball and show them being rolled down steps just like these. So we do know that some people were sacrificed in order to ensure the victory of the forces of good ended in the sacrifice of a loser.
For hundreds of years, the blood pact between the kings of Copan and their subjects seemed to have stood them in good stead. Copan flourished. By 600, Copan and her sister cities were unrivaled centers of art and learning. From among the 15,000 works of Copan art collected here in the last decade, art historian Barbara Fash finds the works created during 18 Rabbits' reign particularly beautiful.
The buildings may have served a function that was utilitarian, but the iconography on the outside of it, the sculpture that was being produced at that time, just raised it to an artistic, aesthetic height that is really unprecedented in Copan and in many other places in the Maya area.
In the history of the Renaissance, not very many people know the name of the Pope Julius, but Julius was the man that commissioned Michelangelo, Raphael, and Leonardo to leave us one of the greatest artistic heritages of the West. 18 Rabbit was the great patron of Copan, and he hired, commissioned, and gave the room to work to some of the greatest artists the Mayas ever had.
18 Rabbit ruled for 43 years. His sculptures, replete with themes of fertility and abundance, speak of a period of peace through strength, giving no hint of the disaster to come.
18 Rabbit is in the guise of First Father, the maize god, and he is the creator of the universe. He and his wife, who was the moon and First Mother, wear the netted skirt. That whole myth is contained in the life cycle of a piece of a maize tree. The little seeds that are put in the ground are called skulls and little bones. And when the maize tree sprouts from the ground, it's the rebirth of the maize god, and it's the rebirth of humanity, because that is the last act before the creation of this universe.
In 738, an aging 18 Rabbit set out on one more conquest to do away with a troublesome neighbor. He was captured and beheaded, an earth-shattering blow to his people. This is the great hieroglyphic stairway of Copan, begun not long after 18 Rabbit's gruesome death. The longest and most ornate inscription in the New World, the Grand Stairway records the complete history of the Copan dynasty. Its magnificent present testifies to a society quickly recovering from the blow of a great king's death, but the excavations reveal a more ominous story.
One of the most telling things about this monument is that even though it makes all these wonderful and grandiose claims, it was actually one of the worst constructed buildings in the entire city. The fill underneath this magnificent facade was the weakest they ever put inside of a building in Copan. That lets us know that the people who were building this pyramid were not nearly as enthusiastic about its message as the king who commissioned it.
As more and more kingdoms established themselves, they wanted their piece of the pie. And it led to a lot of internal strife that often was resolved in battle.
So first we see a weakening of the central order. Second is the actual collapse of the monarchical system of government. And that's literally all she wrote. There are no more monuments going up in Copan.
Copan had gone from a thriving, peaceful center of art and commerce to a valley of desperate people struggling to feed themselves. For physical anthropologist turned forensic detective Rebecca Story, the bones of Copan yield a grim prognosis.
Most of them probably died of the results of the overpopulation. That is, malnutrition and infection worked together to kill many children, and even the adults that survived eventually ended up dying of the effects of infection. By the time this individual was there, the population of the valley was probably in steep decline.
Some 20,000 people were hungry or sick in the valley of Copan. How could it have happened that this thriving metropolis was reduced to this?
They set up the city on the most fertile agricultural lands, down on the bottomlands that the river had carved out and made fertile over the centuries. By doing so, they were basically cutting off their own food supply. They weren't able to farm the best lands. They were then obliged to cut down the forest on the slopes. In doing so, that caused erosion. As they had to cut back even higher up, this made for deforestation on a large scale that prevented the rain clouds from coming into the valley. And they provoked the collapse of the central authority first, but they also provoked the long-term abandonment of the valley because people simply couldn't get enough to eat here anymore.
The evidence suggests that the city grew rank with its own waste, that there was not a tree standing within 25 miles, and that the overworked soil could not begin to feed the hungry multitudes who lived there. Copan had become a victim of its own success.
For nearly 1,000 years, the kings of Copan upheld a blood covenant with their gods and their people. The Maya prospered. They built great monuments, deciphered the heavens, created objects of great beauty. But when their world began to collapse, even the blood of kings could not forestall disaster. In just a generation, the monarchy stumbled. Soon the great city would lie empty, reclaimed by the jungle.
Most of us who deal with the Maya think Maya civilization either ended at the collapse in the 9th century, or it was destroyed by the Spanish invasion. But in fact, there are millions of Maya who still live in this worldview. It's still alive, it's still active, it's still incredibly productive. And what they have found is that the actions of their lives have roots that go back 3,000 years. And for our people who have been told that they are the ersatz leftover folk Catholic product of a European power, and that they have no value in themselves and they have no history, to have the glyphs put back in their hands is a miracle. And they say it is.
Today, with the hieroglyphs pouring out their stories, Copan is yielding a rich human history.
It's important to recognize and absorb the fact that one of the oldest, continuous, and most detailed written history of the human species is Maya, and it is written on those stones.
You feel attached to the bones that are here, you know, you feel attached to the monuments that are here. They're ancestors, you know, they're still a part of our history, you know, and we're not excavating somebody else's, we're excavating our own history. This is of significance to our own people. It's unraveling the roots of our nation. I was only going to be here for a year, and I've been here 15, so to say how long, I think I'm going to stay for a long time. Copan is in my blood.
In a high valley in central Mexico lie the ruins of a vast city. It was destroyed by a fire centuries before the arrival of the Aztecs, who spoke of it in awe, calling it the City of the Gods, the place where the sun, moon, and earth emerged, and time itself was set in motion. But nobody knew who built the city, or how it rose to power. Now at last, in these vivid murals, researchers have found hidden clues, revealing a cult of human sacrifice. I'm John Rhys-Davies. Join me as we discover the grim secret of the City of the Gods. Next on Archaeology. Mexico City, the fastest growing city on earth, a chaotic, vibrant explosion of humanity. 30 million people will live here by the year 2000. At the heart of the city are the shattered ruins of an ancient Aztec capital. Nearly 500 years ago, Cortez and the conquering Spanish were amazed by the architecture they found here, and repelled by the evidence of a militaristic cult of human sacrifice. On these steps, thousands of captives were sacrificed. Aztec priests tore out their hearts. Their blood was thought to sustain the sun and perpetuate the fertility of the land. The Aztecs told legends of how the cult began and how the gods, to whom the sacrifices were made, had dwelled in a mythical first city, 30 miles northeast of the Aztecs' capital, where today the smog ends and the suburbs turn into fields. It was bigger than ancient Rome. The Aztecs called it Teotihuacan, the City of the Gods. For centuries, the haunting ruins of Central America have stirred deep questions among scholars and travelers. What impels the rise of great cities and civilizations? What leads to their downfall? Today, we know these cities by evocative names: Monte Alban, Uxmal, Chichen Itza. One by one, they enjoyed their moment in the sun, and then they faded from greatness. The mystery is deepest of all in the case of the legendary city of the gods at Teotihuacan. But now archaeologists have uncovered an extraordinary set of murals that may explain the violent demise of this enigmatic city. In 1910, the people of Mexico City celebrate the 100th anniversary of the fight for independence from Spain and the 80th birthday of dictator-president Porfirio Diaz. To mark the double celebration, a shrewd and flamboyant man, Leopoldo Batres, convinced the president to part with an immense sum to restore the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan. What more impressive testament could there be to the glory of Mexico's past? But Batres had taken on more than he bargained for. His mule trains hauled away dirt at the rate of 100 tons an hour, 1,000 tons a day, on a specially built railroad. Still, the mighty structure was slow to emerge from the debris. Batres's diggers revealed a structure 20 stories high. The base covered an area equal to that of Egypt's Great Pyramid at Giza. Batres found traces of brightly painted plaster and sculpture on the outside, and the bones of a sacrificed child at each corner. But still, the identity of the builders and the reasons for the city's rise and fall eluded him. The first breakthroughs in understanding came in the early 1960s. The Mexican government restored a majestic 3-mile-long avenue running through the heart of the ancient city. 600 workers toiled to restore the second pyramid at the site, known by local people as the Pyramid of the Moon. It's 15 stories high. Meanwhile, the core of the city was thoroughly surveyed and mapped, all 12 square miles of it. Wherever they looked, the surveyors found ruins of apartment blocks, spacious rooms grouped around central courtyards. Like this one, currently under excavation in the southwest corner of the city. Each set of rooms was occupied by a family or a group of artisans. Perhaps 200,000 people were living in these apartment blocks at the height of the city's power.
What's fascinating about Teotihuacan is that very elaborate masonry apartment buildings were built for its population. We think of most of Mesoamerican cultures as having great palaces and then huts for the ordinary people. At Teotihuacan, everybody lived in very high quality or reasonably high quality apartment compounds. And many of these were painted. So many of these murals do not come from temples or ritual areas, but from homes. And we have an idea of what ordinary homes in Teotihuacan looked like.
But unlike the famous Roman wall paintings at Pompeii, Teotihuacan's murals offer few glimpses of everyday life. Instead, we encounter mythological beasts and fantastically attired warriors. For images of ordinary people, we have evidence from figurines, simple clay figures, both male and female, that are found in house foundations and refuse all over the city. Archaeologist Warren Barber estimates he's studied around 150,000 of them.
Hundreds of the figurines, in fact, the vast majority of the figurines represent everyday life. The vast majority of the so-called puppet figurines and puppet and portrait figurines depict the everyday person that was walking around Teotihuacan. Some have no clothing whatsoever, some have a lot of clothing. Interestingly enough, the ones that have no clothing also rarely have depict genitalia. The Teotihuacanos seem to have been rather prudish about that and avoided depicting human sexuality. The figurines were used in a variety of ways inside a household. Some were used in ceremonies that related the individuals inside the apartment compounds to the state. Others, I have small pregnant figurines that I identify early in the very beginning of Teotihuacan. And I believe those were used in curing ceremonies. Perhaps, well, you don't actually cure pregnancy, but you sort of help it along. Every time I look at one of their faces, every time someone sees a Teotihuacan figurine, they are reminded of what the thousands and thousands of people that lived here for over 1,000 years.
Neither the figurines nor the murals depict rulers or warriors, and there are almost no written inscriptions or numbers. Consequently, we have few direct clues about how the city managed to accumulate so much power. But the local valley is fertile, well watered by underground springs. It also has deposits of obsidian, prized for making sharp tools and arrowheads. And it was well placed for trading with the coast and with the lowlands to the south. But archaeologists now suspect it was an ideology, not just economics, that touched off the city's phenomenal growth. The clue came in 1971. Heavy rains caused the ground to subside in front of the Pyramid of the Sun. When diggers probed the spot, they found a stairway and a long passage into the earth. This led to a large natural cave close to the pyramid's center. The conclusion seemed obvious. The layout of the pyramid, and probably the entire city, was centered on this cave. It's likely that the Teotihuacanos thought of it as a sacred cave, where their ancestors first emerged. Pilgrims probably came from far and wide.
If you look at Teotihuacan, it looks like a gigantic theater. Enormous pyramids, stairways, plazas, all seems to be ready-made for ritual activity. And I imagine that there was once spectacular, costumed rituals, dances, performances, and sacrifices that were taking place.
The Teotihuacanos worshipped a goddess whose image appears in the murals. She had two aspects, one violent, hinted at by her bird of prey warrior helmet, the other life-giving. Seeds sprouting branches and streams of water or blood flow from her. And there were other deities, a goggle-eyed storm god, connected with rain and fertility as well as blood and sacrifice, and a plumed serpent, whom the Aztecs called Quetzalcoatl, a god of the winds and a fierce warrior associated with the planet Venus.
In Chichen Itza and among the Aztecs, the feathered serpent was a symbol of royal individuals. And it is found in the royal palace at Teotihuacan, so very possibly it is a symbol of royalty. But it is also a symbol of nature. The serpent that sheds its skin is a symbol of immortality and regeneration, regeneration of nature, the changing of the rainy season and the dry season following each other, one after the other. And so the serpent is a symbol of the cosmos in some ways that seems to have been used for political purposes.
But who was in control of that political power? Are the bones of warlords or priests to be found under pyramids such as this one, known today as the Temple of Quetzalcoatl? Here's how it may have looked in its heyday, with its brilliantly painted and sculptured facade. Throughout the 1980s, a Mexican-American team explored its foundations. The results were startling. Probing the southern edge of the pyramid, the team found 3 burial pits, the largest of which contained the bones of 18 young men. They had hundreds of arrowheads and ornaments buried with them, not to mention bizarre necklaces consisting of human upper jaws. Some of the jaws were real, others imitation ones carved from shell. As digging progressed, more skeletons turned up, laid out in a precise, symmetrical pattern around the pyramid. Exactly opposite the first pit, they found a second with remains of another 18 sacrificed young men with the same strange jaw necklaces. But even more remarkable was the placement of the skeletons.
Se encontraron con las manos.
They were found laid out in a semi-flexed position, their hands behind their backs, together, as if they had been bound. This would indicate that they were possibly sacrificed.
It was a unique find. No evidence of sacrifice on this scale had previously been discovered at Teotihuacan. Unfortunately, looters had tunneled to the center of the pyramid in ancient times, and no evidence remains of the royal grave that may have prompted such a mass sacrifice. Eventually, it became clear that as many as 200 people may have been killed, apparently in a single act just prior to the building of the pyramid.
The most obvious suggestion is that they're captured enemy soldiers. I think that's certainly possible, but I think it's also very possible that what we see is a sort of Teotihuacan honor guard for a king who may have been buried in one of the looted burials at the center. We don't have the king, so we just have to conjecture about that. But it does seem like it could be his guardsmen and members of his household who are buried there.
The identity of the king and his unfortunate followers will probably always be a matter of conjecture. But we do have dramatic new clues about Teotihuacan's grim cult of sacrifice and the events that led to the final fiery collapse of the great city. Those clues emerged here. On a hilltop 80 miles to the east lie the ruins of Cacaxtla. In 1975, treasure hunters bore a tunnel into a mound and were startled to confront this vivid mural. Realizing it was impossible to remove it without destroying it, they alerted the authorities. One by one, astonishingly fresh and realistic paintings were brought to light. The subjects of the paintings were quite similar to the murals of Teotihuacan. There were elaborately costumed figures alongside symbols of fertility and fruitfulness, like this corn plant sprouting human heads. But there were also grimmer scenes. 2 giant murals, with life-size warriors driving spears into the chests of their enemies. The paintings seem to celebrate a battle victory, but researcher John Carlson has a different interpretation.
The Cacaxtla battle murals are portraits of a sacrifice. It's 2 sequential presentations. The east comes before the west, just like the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. The west battle mural shows a grim picture of sacrificial victims. They're presented without their full war costumes. None of them have weapons, and some of them are painted completely blue, which is a symbolism of sacrifice in ancient Mesoamerica. You see, the bird warriors are not in battle. They've already been captured, and they've been brought here to Cacaxtla, presumably, to be sacrificed. It's traditional in ancient Mesoamerica for the captors to display their captives. One of the goals of battle was to take captives and then show your power and authority by displaying the humiliated captives. And this is what we see here at Cacaxtla in a very, very graphic form. In the West battle murals, the captain of the Cacaxtla warriors, the jaguar warriors, is holding the bird warrior captain under guard. There's a relationship between these two. When you look at their faces, you see that they're staring each other in the eye. They've formed a relationship. The captor is displaying his prisoner. The prisoner is accepting his fate.
Star-like symbols appear often in the murals, as they do at Teotihuacan. Carlson believes that these symbols stand for the planet Venus, and that the battles and sacrifices depicted at Cacaxtla were probably timed according to the position of Venus in the sky. It was an astrologically timed cult of war and sacrifice.
It seems now that there's solid evidence for widespread practice of a Venus-regulated sacred warfare and associated ritual sacrifices. The warfare was certainly also for conquest and gain, but there was an element to obtain captives for sacrifice. The basic equation is that the gods must be paid back for the sacrifices that the gods made for us. And there's a transformation of blood into water and fertility through this practice of Venus-regulated human sacrifice.
By carefully studying the paintings, Carlson thinks that this small chamber at Kokoshla is the place where captives were prepared for death.
Female on the right. The male figure.
On either side are blue scorpion gods, flanked by Venus symbols.
My hypothesis about such Venus sacrificial chambers is that they should exist at other sites around Mesoamerica where we can document that the cult existed. And interestingly enough, there was a recent discovery by archaeologist Ruben Cabrera in the La Ventilla area of Teotihuacan.
The clues add up to an extraordinary picture. More than 13 centuries ago, the influence of the Teotihuacano cult had reached Kokoshla, giving rise to a cult that ritually executed prisoners of war to honor the star gods worshipped throughout ancient Mexico. But who exactly were the victims? The last mural to be discovered at Kokoshla concealed a final surprise. They are painted on the floor, and they show the emaciated, starved bodies of captives. On the step below are signs that appear to stand for place names, presumably the names of cities that the Kokoshlans defeated. One of these strongly resembles the special architecture of Teotihuacan. So was it the Kokoshlans who finally burnt and destroyed the city of the gods?
When we actually look at the emaciated captives, the one at the top, between his legs, has a burning temple symbol, the universal Highland Mexican symbol for conquest. And the flames, the three flames that sprout from the temple, are in the Teotihuacan style. So summing up, I feel that there's a good case that the Kokoshla merchant warriors may have been among the peoples that burned and destroyed the core of ancient Teotihuacan.
A fiery inferno consumed the city of the gods around 750 AD. The blaze wasn't accidental. It was confined to the 600 or so temple structures in the city center. The Mexican archaeological team is excavating one of those temples, and the signs of fire are everywhere.
Aquí tenemos un ejemplo del tremendo saqueo que sufrió la antigua ciudad de Teotihuacán.
Here we have an example of the tremendous sacking suffered by the ancient city of Teotihuacan. In this space, there was a staircase built of these stones that we now see strewn about. And this is a sanctuary, the interior of which was also pillaged for the valuable offerings and materials which, to them, had religious and ritual meaning.
Que para ellos tenían un significado religioso y ritual, ya que los edificios teotihuacanos.
The Teotihuacan buildings were basically made of wood and stone. The wood, on burning, carbonized the rocks. The red portions you see are evidence of this.
El fuego que sufrió esta roca.
But who put the mighty city to the torch? Could it have been a revolution from within? Archaeologists have documented an increasing gap between rich and poor, as well as signs of nutritional stress in human bones excavated from burials. But more important, the area directly controlled by Teotihuacan seems to have gradually shrunk as the centuries passed and other rival centers grew in power.
Teotihuacan had always been an international city. We know from the archaeological evidence that it contained barrios or enclaves of foreigners, merchants from the Gulf Coast, merchants from Oaxaca, pottery makers, and so forth. I think there's every reason to believe that the Kokoshla people had been living in Teotihuacan and had their enclaves there for centuries. But as the old city began to lose its potency, these people traveled up from the coast along one of their ancient trade routes and established themselves here at Cacaxtla. In a sense, they are one of these upstart elites that was just waiting for the old city to lose its potency before taking over.
The religious heart of Teotihuacan was the Pyramid of Quetzalcoatl, built on the bodies of 200 captive soldiers sacrificed to the storm god and Quetzalcoatl, the god of Venus and the winds. Through the centuries, that same bloody cult of Venus persisted. Even as the power of the city itself began to falter, the religion it had spawned maintained its grip even on the minds of outsiders, like the people of Cacaxtla. Here, they practiced their own bloodletting rituals dedicated to Venus. Ironically, the same religion that propelled Teotihuacan to power may have hastened its downfall.
Thanks to recent discoveries, we know that Teotihuacan drew its power from a cult that demanded the shedding of human blood in exchange for the divine guarantee of fertility and abundance. Those beliefs persisted and outlived the great city itself. Eventually, they were transformed into the bloody cult of the Aztecs, in which hundreds, even thousands of captives were sacrificed in a single day. We tend to look back at that world and shudder, thankful that such savagery is far in humankind's historic past. Perhaps it would be wise of us to remember that for instances of brutal, irrational, and casual disregard for the value of human life, we need look no further back than our own century.